Hello and welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to explore the topic of the militarization of Europe. Europe, as you know, has been demilitarized after Cold War, and recently we started to see a lot of new improvements in the region. So today in the show, we have the retired Brigadier General Ufuk Uras. Welcome, General. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So to begin with this topic, what does the term militarization mean? And as just a member of a society, what should we understand from this regarding Europe's militarization in general?
Militarization refers to a nation or state or a region in which the military capabilities are expanded, improved. Investments in modernization of armed forces, investment in defense industry, expansion of forces are all involved as part of militarization process. It's a large process. As you just mentioned, following the Cold War, Europe has shifted its force structures from conventional to light forces. It was a big change, mainly due to the changing security environment of the time. In the early 90s, the Europeans had to carry out some peace missions, either the umbrella of the United Nations or NATO. And after September 11, the focus was counter-terrorism operations. The European forces were deployed into Afghanistan and some other areas. There were no need to have very heavy weapons like tanks, artillery, and many countries in Europe, like Germany, France, United Kingdom, have reduced the size of their heavy units. But with the emergence of Russia as a threat to Europe, I mean, this is not what I say, but this is what the Europeans believe. They noticed that their forces are not well enough to conventionally counter the so-called Russian threat. They found themselves that they should invest more again to conventional capabilities. This is the number one reason. Especially Russia's operations in 2004 in Crimea and following that the war between Russia and Ukraine has driven Europeans to invest more and more to their defenses. Another important factor was the US approach. President Trump, when he came to power for the first time, he pushed the European NATO allies to invest minimum 2% of their GDPs to their defenses. This was agreed in NATO, and this criteria was met. Now, when President Trump came to power again, very ambitiously, he elevated this 2% to the 5%.
Yeah.
NATO agreed on this, and in the coming 10 years, the countries should, or the countries will have 5% of their GDP allocated for their defense systems.
I
So
see.
this is very ambitious, and it's a big amount of budget. There are two main drivers, as I said. First, the Russian threat perception, and the second one is the US approach. The US criticized Europe for relying on US resources, and Europe, according to US, should develop its own defense system so that they would not need the US. And this is all about, I mean, the Russian threat, the so-called Russian threat, whether it's a real threat or is it it is exaggerated.
Yeah.
This has to be discussed.
Yes, it was my next question actually. What do you think is the Russian threat to Europe? Is it an illusion or reality? Underestimated,
Uh,
overestimated?
it is neither an illusion nor reality, I would say. It's a complex issue. After the Cold War, many of the former Warsaw Pact countries have become NATO countries, and Russia opposed to that. I mean, in the Cold War time, there were many Warsaw countries, and those countries were like a buffer zone between NATO and Russia. But then, when those countries have become NATO members, then NATO and Russia now have direct borders. And that is indeed have alerted Russia too. Russia perceives NATO as a threat. Both sides now perceive other side as a threat to its security.
But how likely is a war between Russia and NATO?
Uh, a war between NATO and Russia, if we think from logical perspective, it's not likely, but there are people I don't understand who want a war between NATO and Russia. A war between Russia and NATO will be devastating and will have very severe consequences. It may lead to a nuclear war. So it has to be avoided. The parties should opt for diplomatic solutions instead of going for military approaches. But there is a mistrust, and the mistrust has not been eased yet. Still, there is a possibility of war between NATO and Russia. And the latest developments have also added some fuel to the already heightened tensions. Concerning the Ukraine case, I mean, it's a very separate and special case. Ukraine is a neighboring state of Russia. And in my opinion, it was a big mistake for the West to offer NATO membership to Ukraine because that provoked Russia. Although NATO and the Western states leaders say that Russia, it was not a provoked war, but indeed it's a provoked war. Ukraine, imagine station of foreign forces in Ukraine could be a direct threat to Russia. For that reason, Russia defined Ukraine, Georgia, Belarus as red line for its security. And it was not acceptable for Russia. Ukraine could have remained as a neutral state and could have good relations both with Russia and the West. Ukraine was a developed country at the time. It had resources, it had well-educated people, a large country, had industry. So Ukraine could have remained as a neutral state.
I see. So I want to also talk about risks of this militarization movement. What are the major risks you see in Europe right now? Especially there are some arguments around Germany's militarization, for instance, since it has a lot of history background. So what do you think about the major risks within the Europe?
The militarization could lead to militarism, which means seeing military as the primary tool for the resolution of issues, both internal issues or external issues. And now the militarization can turn out to become a militarism in Europe. There are some signals of this, and it's a big risk for the democracies of Europe. There are serious concerns about the militarization of Germany because Germany was at the center of both the First and the Second World Wars. Historically, countries, smaller countries maybe in Europe have some concerns, and countries outside Europe, like North Africa or Middle East, may have concerns regarding the entire militarization of Europe. Concerning the relations between Russia and Europe, the militarization would add fuel to the already heightened tensions. The mistrust has to be resolved by diplomatic means, but both parties now are investing heavily in their militaries. New countries have become NATO countries now, like Finland and Sweden. There are different claims about this. The people of Sweden and Finland did not want to become NATO member, but it was only their governments decided to become NATO members. So there are many debates and discussions on these issues in Europe.
I see. So I wonder how will the increasing militarization in Europe also impact Turkey, since it is a NATO member and it is just next to the Middle East and Europe, so it's a bridge in there.
The Turkey and NATO and Europe relations are very complex. Turkey is a NATO member and ally of the NATO countries. In that sense, the cooperation for the militarization of Europe um, seems as an opportunity also for Turkey, because Turkey now has a boomed defense industry and is capable of manufacturing mass amounts of ammunition, weapons, equipment, so that Turkey could contribute to the development and improvement of European capabilities. And Europe wants that. There are some objections to that from some European countries, but many or most of the European countries favor a defense cooperation with Turkey. On the other side, Turkey and Europe has always been competitors historically. During the Ottoman time and even before, the two powers, I would say, had always in competition. And today we see the reflections of the historical facts. In that sense, a very militarized Europe could also be a concern for Turkey.
I see. Yeah, that makes total sense. So I also wonder, as you know, you also mentioned President Trump, but we witnessed rebranding of the US Defense Ministry as the Ministry of War, right? So they renamed it, and there are some changes happening in the US in terms of this aspect too. Is there any correlation between Europe's militarization and the things happening in there?
All right, it's a very interesting question. President Trump, when he came to power, he stated, and even long before he came to power during his electoral campaigns, he said that he would want to be remembered as a peacemaker in the world.
He
He
also
was against
won
wars.
Nobel Peace Prize for himself.
Yes,
Yes.
right. But now Trump administration changed the name of the Department of Defense to Department of War. It's an important change. I mean, because the war was defined as an illegitimate phenomena after the Second World War, except self-defense. Countries changed their names to defense. I mean, there was Ministry of War in United Kingdom and in other countries, and all the names changed to defense because only defense war is legitimate. But now changing this to war means making the war legitimate. It is legitimizing the concept of war. So it's very dangerous, in my opinion. That also reflects the thoughts behind the new approaches of the US policies towards the world. You know, there is now a global power competition in the world. The West is in decline, and that's a fact economically, socially, and militarily when compared to the developments of new emerging powers like China, Russia, India, Brazil, Turkey, and other countries. For that reason, I think there is maybe not a direct correlation between the militarization of Europe and the name change in US, but there is an indirect reflection of the new approaches to the global power competition.
I see, General. Thank you. So maybe we can close this program up by just one answer. What are your expectations from the future after this militarization movement? What are your expectations, and what do you think in the future?
The world now has entered into a new age, or is entering into a new age, and there are serious crises are emerging in this transformation. The world has now two ways, two main options, I can say, either to overcome the challenges of this transformation by wars or by peace. Some people favor war, some people still advocate for the peace. There is a big risk of regional or world war. So the wars should be avoided. It is possible, but it depends on the attitudes of the global leaders. If they insistently try to do their best in favoring the peace, I believe that they could make it possible.
hopefully it will be the way they will choose. Thank you for this great conversation. It was really enlightening for us. So thank you, General. Have a nice day, and we'll see you in the next program.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind invitation, and it was also a pleasure for me to talk on this topic.